Hey y'all, this is Mercy Sherger. You may be wondering, I know her from Moments with Mercy a couple years ago. I used to read that website, but she had a different last name. I do. My name used to be Lyman, and as of about 2 weeks ago, it is now Sherger. I got married to this wonderful human being. His name is Isaac. Um, we are here today to tell you guys a little bit about a Worthy Conversations podcast, why I quit podcasting, interviewing, why I'm back, and what I've been up to since then. Here to answer a couple questions that maybe you guys would have about the podcast. And yep, you know more about that side of it than I do because I'm not the one asking the questions. He's going to be interviewing me.
In fact, I did not approve any of the questions that I'm about to ask with Mercy previously. So I don't know if that makes it frightening or if it makes it interesting or exciting. Maybe all of the above, but I'm really looking forward to seeing where this podcast goes. And so, just a couple of questions, I guess, to get us started.
Yeah.
So, why now? Why the podcast? What's the motivation behind starting a worthy conversation?
So I'll give a little bit of backstory. Some of you watching or listening to this may remember that I did have a website called Moments with Mercy. I started that website when I was 14 years old, I believe. And my goal with that was just interviewing people that I looked up to. So whether that was an actor or an author or a speaker, anyone like that, I just loved the opportunity for me. I love to get to know people, which I'm an introvert, so that's not what people always think, but I just love to get to know about others. Um, why they do what they do, why they think the way they think about certain things like that. So one of my goals with that website was to always keep it clean. You'll find that has carried over to this podcast. Um, there'll never be swearing or crude language on here. We may cover some sensitive topics. But we'll always let you guys know beforehand if we are going to do that. Um, so kind of transitioning in 2020, 2021, I had a lot of life changes going on at the time. Some things going on where my family ended up moving across the country from Illinois to Kentucky, and now I'm in Ohio. So kind of transitioned a lot of places. I've moved within a short space. I've moved probably about 5 times in that from 2021 to now. So just a lot going on, and I had to make the decision to step back from podcasting and interviewing because there was just too much going on to keep up with it. So I made the decision to do that and always kind of wanted to step back into it. Q now, life has slowed down a little bit, as weird as that may sound, because we just got married. um, but it slowed down enough that we prayed about it. You encouraged me, and some other people encouraged me, and we decided to take the leap and step back into it. I've been talking with some people about doing this since last spring. So we kind of just took that leap. As far as the name, A Worthy Conversations, because when we were first discussing names, that kind of we were like that might come across as a little bit like pompous, um, which is not how we mean it. Um, for me, why we chose that name is every human being has worth. I believe that we are all created in the image of God, and therefore we have value and we have worth. Um, so I'm gonna have people in this podcast that I may not agree with an opinion or a perspective that they share, but that doesn't mean it's not worth being heard. It doesn't mean it's not worth being talked about. Um, we may leave the podcast and just continue to disagree and go about our lives, but I enjoy discussion. I enjoy getting to hear another person's point of view, even if I don't agree with it. I love being able to talk to people that feel that same way. So yeah, I mean, as human beings, we have worth, and that was what I kind of wanted to carry into this is that it's a worthy conversation, not because, oh my gosh, look at the things we're talking about. We're so, this is such a great conversation or whatever. every human being has worth. So it is a worthy conversation because of that.
Hmm. That's really interesting to hear your heart behind that. And how has that for the readers, I guess, of readers or the listeners or the viewers of Moments with Mercy, how will the Worthy Conversation podcast be different than the Moments with Mercy podcast?
Um, I'd like to think that I've grown a little bit since then. So I think it'll be um a little bit more mature than that blog was. Um, I was actually looking back through because Moments with Mercy during my time away got hacked, so I lost a decent chunk of those reviews and interviews, but I've been able to save some of them. Um, and I was looking back to try and get some of those added to my new website so that way people kind of like knew what the transition was, that kind of thing, and could still read some of those old interviews. Um, and it was interesting even to see my growth from when I started the blog at 14 to when I ended it at 20. Um, so I'd like to think I've grown a little bit more since then. So I think I also got into a rut sometimes with Moments with Mercy of not making each podcast geared towards the person I was interviewing. And that's really a goal of mine with a Worthy Conversations is doing that kind of transition.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, that definitely sounds neat. You mentioned that there's been some ways that you've grown since Moments with Mercy. What would you say that the primary ways or areas where you've seen growth in your own life have been since 2021, about when that time ended?
Good question. Um, I'd like to think that I've learned to care a lot more about other people. And a lot more about caring about people, even if we completely disagree on everything.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely a message that the world needs for sure. And it would be neat to see how that plays out.
Yeah.
What would be or what would be like your vision or your goal for like when a Worthy Conversations podcast is at its peak?
Mhm.
What does that look like? What is the peak of this podcast look like?
I don't really know quite yet.
Eh,
Um, One of my goals with this is to hopefully eventually um transition some of the interviews into a book format, which is a long way down the road and more of just like what I want to build, would love to build this into as a whole. Um, but I would love to eventually like some of these people that I'm going to be interviewing, um, to kind of transition into like just a almost a Worthy Conversations book where you could just grab a book and read through all of the interviews in the comfort of your own home without having to look at a screen.
huh. That's interesting. That's interesting. It would be neat to see that vision come to fruition. Who have been some of the most interesting people that you interviewed with Moments with Mercy?
Okay. There's a lot. There was a lot of people that I was blessed to get to know on a personal level, even outside of doing the interviews. A lot that I was blessed to just go and do return interviews with.
Hmm.
Um, there's some people that I've done 5 interviews with,
Wow.
and that was awesome.
Wow. Okay.
Um, so I'm trying to think. I probably have done so for those who are familiar with Celtic Thunder. Um, I think I've done 3 or 4 interviews with Damien McGinty. Um, Hallmark World is where a lot of the return interviews came. Um, Andrew Walker, Tyler Hines, Christopher Falaha, I've done 5 or 6 with. One of my favorites ones with that was we did a interview with him in character as his character Travis Burke on Mystery 101.
Hmm.
So that was a lot of fun.
Hmm.
I would say probably the highlight interviews I've been able to do are um, any with Christopher Falaha. I That one's always been one that we've been able to go to like a little bit of a like deeper level. And then also childhood me was super happy to get to interview Dean Butler from Little House on the Prairie.
Hmm.
I grew up watching that show, so the opportunity to speak with him was really, really awesome.
Yeah, super neat. Super neat. That's neat. What would you say have been the best conversations that you had with Christopher Palaha? You mentioned that they went to a deeper level. What did that look like? What were those conversations?
Um, so I always knew that I could ask him a question and he would always give me the most honest answer. Whether that was about working on a specific movie or about personal life. Um, I remember specifically when he told me the one time about like when he got into character, like he walked me through the process of how he did that. And it was because it was going very deeply into a character, and I really, really enjoyed hearing about that because I'm not an actor. I never could be. So hearing how an actor does that, I mean, we talked about Christianity, and I love hearing his testimony. Um, if you haven't heard that, look it up. That's a really awesome testimony. I've just always appreciated. I don't know that I can really point out like one specific time, but I always knew that we could go on that deeper level.
That's super cool. And have you ever been able to have those kind of deeper conversations with anyone besides him?
I have. I did it with Andrew Walker a couple times. Nikki DeLoach, was another one. And then I really, really appreciated when I got to speak with Jen Lilly. Um, she brought me through what the adoption process looked like
Wow.
because they were in the middle of adopting.
Wow, very cool.
So that was really cool as someone who might want to adopt someday,
Hmm.
hearing what that looked like. So, yeah.
It seems like you enjoy hearing about a lot of different topics and perspectives. And for the audience, I have very little knowledge of the Moments with Mercy, how that looked, how that went. So I'm learning right
Yeah.
alongside you and kind of gaining that insight on that and how that's going to translate.
Mhm.
Um, so what functionally, what is a Worthy Conversations podcast going to look like? Like what can the audience expect from a typical podcast?
Um, so for a typical podcast, this is going to be the same like um it's in the same system of Moments with Mercy where I'm not stuck to a specific genre. I'm not just going to interview actors. I'm not just going to interview musicians or authors. I am going to interview people that my hope is to broaden it into athletes and politicians and newscasters. Um, Again, I love learning about other people, so no matter what lifestyle they lead or whatever, job they have, I just really enjoy getting to know about people. So it's going to follow the same format as that. I would love to also back in Moments with Mercy, I had interviewed some people from old Hollywood. And that was really, really awesome as someone who grew up watching old Hollywood movies. Um, we're gonna probably look at as far as like specific format. My goal is gonna be to keep it anywhere between 25 to 35 minutes. It may vary a little bit as far as time. Um, I'm thinking for me, I have about a 35-minute drive to work. It's something I love to listen to on the way to work.
Hmm.
Um, so I kind of want to keep it in that anyone, who has to travel a little bit of a distance to work, or you can listen to it while you're cooking dinner. Um, we will end up having the podcast available on several different what's the word?
Media outlets,
Yeah, thank
avenues.
you.
Yes.
Brain freeze.
Yeah. Um,
Media outlets. So we'll
yeah.
have it.
What are some of those? What
Um,
how can the audience access the content?
Definitely Spotify, definitely the website, which is kind of pending right now. We're getting everything actually added so we can post that and publish it. Um, trying to think. Hopefully, eventually, Apple Podcasts. It'll be on YouTube. And if you follow me on Instagram or on the Facebook page, I'll be posting on there when a podcast is uploaded. So you can find it in that way as well.
Fantastic. Fantastic. And if one of our viewers wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way would be either on Instagram is where I'm most active, just because that's my favorite form of social media. So my Instagram handle is a Worthy Conversations podcast. Um, Facebook page, I'm on there, but I'm not really on there. Um, and that's a Worthy Conversations hosted by Mercy Sugar. And then you can always reach me at my email, which is just a Worthy Conversations podcast at gmail.com.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And kind of diving back, switching gears back into the meat or the content of the podcast. So you're gonna have a lot of different perspectives and opinions.
Yeah.
But you have your own perspectives and opinions that are very important to you.
Hmm.
How do you balance listening to someone else's opinion and completely disagreeing with it?
I think it's all about respect. Um, so I have opinions that I hold to and I strongly hold to that I won't back down from. But I'm also not against hearing from someone who holds to a completely different opinion or worldview. So, um, I think it's all about respect, and respect goes both ways. I'm here to listen. I'm here to talk with someone. I'm not here to bash them. Most people know what my opinions are on a lot of things that will probably be talked about on this podcast. Some of those views aren't popular, some of them are, but um, again, I think it's just all about respect for another human being
Hmm.
and that it goes both ways.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely interesting and definitely a balance that I look forward to seeing play out in the podcast. What are what are your what are your guidelines for who you'll be choosing for the podcast? Like like is there a point in which there's certain people that like you wouldn't allow on the podcast or would allow on the podcast, and how will you decide that?
So that's actually something kind of been thinking over. There was the part of me who would love to be like, well, I'm just gonna rein it in, and there's just gonna be certain things that I'm not even gonna touch. Um, I'm not still for certain where I stand on that, but I would love to be able to just open it up. I do reserve the right as the podcast host and editor to decide, hey, that's crude, or I don't want that on here and people to think I stand behind that. So I may not include that in a posted interview. Um, but I'm not going to not share someone else's perspective. Um, so again, yeah, if there's swearing, crudity, things like that, I will edit it out. But this isn't about me like only sharing my point of view.
Hmm. Interesting. And do you plan on, is this more of an interview style podcast, or do you plan on doing more like a monologue interview monologue type thing? Like how do you plan on doing that?
So I think that kind of depends on each person that I interview. I personally try to match the style or comfortability of whoever I'm interviewing. If they want me to just ask them a question and they answer, we kind of go with that. If they just want to have like a back and forth conversation while we're talking about what's going on in their life, why they do something a certain way, I do it that way.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, this definitely sounds exciting and really worthwhile to listen to. I hope the audience experiences the same thing. Setting the podcast aside a little bit, what's one interesting thing about yourself that you would like to share with the audience that I don't know?
I don't know. I feel like you know most things about me, and that's what's weird. So, because I mean, we have only known each other about 2.5 years. Yeah. Um, you know tennis, you know the music.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, nothing. Is there anything like random, interesting,
I mean, there's things that
oddball?
I can share that I know the audience will not
Yeah,
know about me,
sure.
but I feel like you know most things about me. Um, so I'm gonna go with when I was about 15 to 16. This one's a little embarrassing. Um, I was really into the TV show Hawaii Five-O, and for whatever reason, I got obsessed with all things Hawaii for a while, and then also obsessed with mermaids, which at 15, 16 isn't exactly what most, that's normally a little bit of a younger age group, but we rolled with it. My family rolled with it.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah, that definitely is a random fact. And is there and what would you say is that, like, if mermaids was your 15, 16 quirky obsession, what would be your current quirky obsession?
current quirky obsession. Um, Coffee. Does coffee count?
Is
I
coffee
mean,
a
it's
quirky?
coffee quirky. I feel like it.
Comment if you're on YouTube. Comment if coffee is a quirky obsession.
Um,
'Cause I feel like it's not. I feel like that's a very normal
okay,
obsession.
so that's normal,
Oh, she just gave up.
I guess. Um, Still comment. I want to know. I feel like it used to be quirky, and now it's not. Um, this is a long-standing. I don't know that this is quirky. You know this. Um, I love history. I guess that's kind of quirky. Is that quirky?
Comment below if liking history is quirky.
Specifically like 50s to 60s period.
Comment below if 50s to 60s history, as an emphasis, is quirky.
If like, yeah, if it's an interest, does that make it quirky?
God.
Am I quirky?
I mean, I think everyone is quirky to some extent or
What
another.
would you say is something that is an interest of mine that's quirky?
I mean, I find it, I find it quirky. Like, you have a dairy allergy.
Okay.
And so the immediate thing that I found quirky about you is that you avoided all things cheese. And cheese is fantastic.
I agree.
But the immediate thing that I found is that you avoided all of those things. That's when I first met you. That was like the number one thing. But that's kind of stemming from an allergy. So, like, oat milk, I didn't even know you could milk an oat. Like, I don't know how that works. And then apparently, like, you don't, like, you like sift it or something. And
Yeah, you put the oats and then
yeah,
yeah.
see, I didn't know that.
Um,
I had no idea.
I
I didn't
will
know that
say
was possible.
you could say the quirky thing about that is the fact that I used to be able to drink milk and have dairy, but then I got a really strong lactose
Yeah.
intolerant allergy. So,
That's interesting, though.
yeah,
I do have a question. Do you believe that everyone is quirky to one degree or another?
absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Have little idiosyncrasies,
Yeah,
different things like that.
everyone has little quirky habits.
Interesting.
I find it endearing.
Interesting. Yeah. Yes. And that'll be interesting to see that in your interviews too, as you're going through different people, like to see their different oddities that make them them. That's part of what makes them unique.
Yeah.
And so that's super interesting. That's super interesting. Well, is there any final message that you would like to leave the audience and the viewers with?
Um, I guess something that I would have is just two things really, I guess. One would be a question for you guys, and that is who would you like to see on the podcast?
Hmm.
Um, Let me know and I'll see what I can do. And then also just a huge thank you to anyone who is listening, watching, however you're going to be catching the podcast. And anyone who has followed me over from Moments with Mercy, just a special thank you because that really means a lot.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, I think that is about wrapped up for this evening.
Yeah.
I will be really excited to release this and
Yeah.
see what the response is. We're
Yeah.
definitely looking forward to all that. And I'll be mostly on the sidelines through all of it,
Yeah.
cheering you on. But um, hopefully this has been a little bit of an introduction time and laying the foundation of more what you guys can expect. And again, where can they reach you if they have any questions or any suggestions or anything?
Best place always is going to be Instagram, which is a Worthy Conversations podcast. or through email, which is a worthy conversations podcast at gmail.com.
All right.
Yep. All right. So thank you guys for joining us this evening, or at least it's evening while we're filming this. We will be getting started with the actual interviews and getting those up probably towards the end of June or beginning of July. I'll keep you guys updated on social media, but until then, thank you for hopping on and listening or watching this, and we really appreciate it. And I'm really looking forward to sharing more of a worthy conversation with you guys. Have a good night.